Socialist Democrats foisted vote-by-mail schemes on America in order to more easily engage in voter fraud and election theft. Third, the lack of photo ID requirements makes it easier for paid Socialist Democrat election thieves to steal elections with voter impersonators. While Socialist Democrats and the fake news media repeatedly and falsely claim there was no voter fraud in 2020, what is most startling is this: America was warned 15 years ago that this would happen. In 2005, a bipartisan commission on federal election reform, co-chaired by Democrat President Jimmy Carter and Reagan White House Chief of Staff James Baker, issued a 105-page report specifically warning about the very same systemic flaws the Socialist Democrats used in 2020 to steal elections. The commission report warns, quote, "Elections are the heart of democracy. If elections are defective, the entire democratic system is at risk." Concerning non-citizen voting, the commission warned of a growing non-citizen voting threat, citing 784 non-citizen votes in a contested California congressional race. The commission recommended that, quote, "All states should use their best efforts to obtain proof of citizenship before registering voters." Of course, that means repealing the Socialist Democrat law that makes it illegal for voter registrars to require proof of citizenship when illegal aliens and other non-citizens demand to be registered to vote. Concerning vote-by-mail schemes, the commission warned that, quote, "Vote-by-mail is likely to increase the risk of fraud in contested election," adding that it, quote, "remains the largest source of potential voter fraud because it is vulnerable to abuse in several ways. Blank ballots mailed to the wrong address or to large residential buildings might get intercepted. Vote buying schemes are far more difficult to detect when citizens vote by mail. The commission recommended minimizing voting by mail. On voter ID, the commission warned that the lack of voter ID opens the door to voter fraud and strongly recommended a photo ID requirement for voters, noting that, quote, "Photo IDs currently are needed to board a plane, enter federal buildings, and cash a check. That voting is equally important, and that voters in nearly 100 democracies use a photo identification card without infringement on their rights." The commission recommended that, quote, "Citizens should identify themselves as the correct person on the registration list when they vote. The problem is not the magnitude of the fraud in close or disputed elections, and there are many. A small amount of fraud could make the margin of difference." How prophetic. Mr. Speaker, America's republic is only as good as its election system. On January 6, 2021, I have a choice. I can ignore truth, surrender to socialism, and accept electoral college submissions from states with election systems so badly flawed as to render their vote submissions unreliable, untrustworthy, and unworthy of acceptance. Or I can fight for America and move to reject them. I can't speak for anyone else, but as for me, Mo Brooks of Alabama's 5th Congressional District, I choose to fight for America. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman from Alabama yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Stevens, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor my friend and the ray of light that was Vicki Wagner Mansfield, a resident of Troy, Michigan, who passed away last month after a 2-year battle with brain cancer. Vicki, simply put, was a pillar of our community, known and beloved by many. She was raised in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and she moved to Troy with her husband Bruce in 1985 to raise their family. Her memory is carried forward by her beloved Bruce, her two amazing daughters, Abby and Rachel, and her delightful grandson, Hank. Vicki was known as a loving wife, mother, grandmother, daughter, sister, friend, aunt, and she is celebrated in our community for her artistic creativity, that forthrightness, her fierce loyalty, and the contributions that she made as an active volunteer in our community. Vicki was a mother's mother, active in PTA and school events and political activities, always with the goal of how do I make this world a better place. So many former students through the Birmingham school system have stood up to say how much Vicki meant to them, how involved she was as a parent with the Girl Scouts or in the play that she did. And it was always because she cared about the outcomes of their lives. Vicki took the time in some of the remaining days that she had to message me to say, not with a complaint or with a question, but to say to me how much she cared about the work that we do in the Congress, to pass along to those who are in elected office a note of gratitude and thanks, to say keep going, to keep giving it all you can. And that is certainly something that Vicki did every day of her life. Her passing is also a stark reminder of our work ahead to improve the research and treatment of cancer in this country. Glioblastoma is a common and aggressive brain cancer with an unfortunately high mortality rate. A strong federal investment is essential to improve our understanding and care of this tragic disease. And for the providers, like those at the Henry Ford Medical Center, and what they rely on for good research. I carry Vicki's light like a torch in the fight for increased funding for cancer research. And as we inch towards this deadline to fund our government, I continue to urge and work with my colleagues to join me in supporting robust brain cancer research, funding at the NIH and DOD to continue this life-saving work. We cannot let those suffering from brain cancer and their families fail. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back
the gentlewoman from Michigan yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to thank and congratulate Gail Langworthy, an incredibly kind and dedicated employee of mine that has served my constituents for 8 years back in the district. Gail is moving on to an exciting new phase of her life, and she's leaving our office to enjoy her retirement. When Gail isn't working hard for the people of Pennsylvania's 15th Congressional District, she's an active volunteer at the Breedtown Cemetery Association of Venango County. She enjoys dancing, visiting her 3 grandchildren in Florida, and exploring local trails where riding bikes with her husband, Jeff. Gail has also been described as an avid thrift shop and yard sale junkie. Gail will be missed by our entire team, but I'm happy for her as she begins this new adventure. Thank you, Gail, for your hard work, dedication, and service, and enjoy your retirement. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Mr. Dave Bailey, who has worked for 31 years for the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer by supporting members' offices with all sorts of technology needs. Dave has been a frequent visitor to our office, to help me and my staff with our computers anytime that we had an issue. He also played a critical role in ensuring our office was ready to telework as we transitioned our lives online at the start of this pandemic. Simply put, we would not be able to do our jobs without people like Dave Bailey. I'm disappointed I will not be able to share my well wishes with Dave in person, but I wanted to take this opportunity to thank him for his 3 decades of service and for all the help that he has provided me and my office. Dave, be well and enjoy your much-deserved retirement. Mr. Speaker, this week we reached a truly incredible milestone in the fight against coronavirus. On Monday, the first COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer was administered, and today the FDA is meeting to approve the Moderna vaccine. The timeline of vaccine development was made possible by Operation Warp Speed, and it is truly a modern medical miracle. In the 1930s, at the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Jonas Salk began work on a polio vaccine. It wasn't until 1953, 23 years later, that the vaccine was successfully tested. Operation Warp Speed has helped shrink the vaccine timeline and knock down barriers and delays to develop a safe, effective vaccine in under a year, and a testament to the incredible scientific progress that we've seen over the years and the refusal of scientists to surrender to this terrible virus. The marshaling of the public sector and the private sector together by President Trump has really resulted in this vaccine that we've all been desperately waiting on. The vaccine is a critical step in saving lives, saving jobs, and saving our economy. Thank you to President Trump for his leadership in Operation Warp Speed, and thank you to all the incredible scientists, doctors, medical professionals, and the others who have helped make history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Slotkin, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 5 minutes and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, on the eve of a hopeful vote on the next COVID relief bill that our Problem Solvers Caucus has so ably led the charge on, I rise to tell the stories of 3 individuals from my district. Their stories represent just a fraction of the messages I've been receiving on COVID relief, but today, on the floor of the People's House, I rise because they deserve to be heard. Their stories are the reason we refuse to go home for Christmas without an agreement. They are why we continue to fight until a deal is reached. First, I'd like to talk about Bob, who wrote to me from Brighton, Michigan. Bob is a pillar of his community. After serving his nation in the Army National Guard for 6 years, he's been giving back to his fellow veterans for over